Happy Tuesday. Welcome to another episode of Let's Start Justice with the Jamaicans for Justice team. My name is Michael Jackson, Executive Director of JFJ.
And I'm Jade Williams, the Policy and Advocacy Specialist at JFJ.
Now, today we're talking the school grooming policy, and this has been an issue for quite some time, several years now. We're going to be joined by Senator Damian Crawford, who's the opposition spokesperson on education. We also have Miss Kayla Wright. She's in studio with us, so we will turn her attention shortly. And she is the project officer with the Jamaica Youth Advocates Network. And we're also possibly going to be joined by Dr. Michael Abraham, who's a social commentator when he's not actually being a medical doctor. All right, so that is our lineup for today. I trust we're staying tuned. And by the way, before we get into the program, it's raining in Kingston. Yay! We should be a little bit cooler.
America, for sure.
So that's good news.
Yes, indeed.
And especially for the teachers and those classrooms, some of them that don't even have fans. So, I won't call on the Ministry of Education here, but where parents can support, in light of the realities, we urge them to.
It's difficult to think of the state of the classrooms right now in terms of the heat.
Yeah, my mom is a teacher. She complains to me. But let's get into it. There was an article in the Jamaica Gleaner last week as we go into our human rights recap of the week. And it made mention of a gentleman, a construction worker. His name is Sean.
Mm-hmm.
Apparently, there was a murder a couple years ago. And this gentleman was detained by law enforcement. And during that time, he made several pleas for an ID parade to be done. And I want to pause here to remind listeners that an ID parade is provided for in law. It is outlined in the current Bail Act of 2000, yeah? Despite several pleas, Mr. Sean spent 8 years behind bars on pretrial detention. When the witness withdrew his statement, and it was clear that Mr. Sean's name, which is a common name, we're a homogeneous society, which means most of us are black people, and it was clear that there was some mix-up, Mr. Sean was released. And I keep saying Mr. Sean and not calling his last name deliberately, because it is beyond me to think that a mix-up with a name, in part, could have led to this miscarriage of justice. Now, his attorneys, rightfully so, had filed a lawsuit against the state. So taxpayers, yet again, are being asked to foot the bill for what is a grave injustice. But let's put aside the economic cost to the country now. Can you imagine pleading your innocence for 8 years, asking for something as simple as an ID parade and being denied? And the prison system in Jamaica is no easy thing to navigate, 8 years. And what it brings to light is this conversation about pre-charge bail. And some of us misunderstanding the concept of bail. Bail is not punishment. The purpose of bail is for those who stand a likely risk of not showing up for court, or, based on the evidence, in the public's interest, or based on the evidence, that person may very well or likely to harm the victim in the matter or witnesses. So it's a risk management perspective or concept that bail is. Bail is not an opportunity for the state that has awesome powers to over-exercise those powers. And I think we must get in line with this concept that though you are accused, until the criminal justice system takes its full course, you are just that, an accused, and you're innocent until proven guilty in the court. And this is an example of why JFJ stand in staunch opposition of the pre-charge bail provisions that the bail bill was passed in the lower house of parliament a couple of weeks ago. It has not yet become law. I don't think it passed in the upper house. I stand corrected, was it?
No, it wasn't.
No. So I know there were some changes, but to the senators who are listening, this is your last attempt to rethink what you have in that bail act, the bill. This is your last attempt. But should common sense not prevail, and I've always used this line, being here at JFJ, fear should not be the driver of public policy. And this is an example of how one man's life and his family would have been affected by the failure of the state and justice being carried out in a manner that is in keeping with the best principles that will make us have trust in the system. All right, that is it from me. Over to you, Jade.
Thank you for that, Mikkel. A very important conversation, I think, since we're on the cusp of this bail bill. As you said, I hope our listeners are following the conversations about it. We do have some resources still on our Instagram pages, so you can see some of the issues that we would have had with the original bill. Much of it has not changed, so there are still relevant points that you can look to get a better understanding of why these objections are being made from our end at JFJ. So we'll go directly now to our right of the day, which is the right to freedom of religion under our Constitution, Section 17. And it states that every person shall have the right to freedom of religion, including the freedom to change his religion and the right, either alone or in community with others, or both in public and in private, to manifest and propagate his religion in worship, teaching, practice, and observance. That's Section 17(1) of your Constitution. And we'll go straight into our trivia question for today, which, if you are listening, you must get this correct. Who was the Minister of Education when the school grooming policy was originally implemented, and what was the full name of the ministry at that time? So if you'd like to.
You know why I laugh when you said the full name of the ministry at that time? Because we really do need to stop it. Waste of money. Every time an administration change, or you feel the whiff of something,
yes,
the name of the ministries change, website change, everything change.
Absolutely, absolutely. But yes, that is our trivia question for today. So if you'd like to participate, please respond to our post on Instagram. Should be up in another minute or so. Or you can respond to our WhatsApp at 2397983. And be reminded, you can call in and participate in the show at 676-4996.
All right, let's get right into it. We're discussing the National School Grooming Policy. And Jade mentioned the original policy. And I won't give the date there because it may help you in getting that response. And I think you need to do a little bit research. But just a week before the new semester for schools were opened, that was last week, the current Minister of Education, that's the Honorable Favour Williams, tabled in Parliament and released the updated school grooming policy, and that was circulated within the schools so that principals could have an opportunity to review. And the school grooming policy, as it did in the earlier stage, is not getting away with it this time. It outlines some of the guidelines and the provisions that schools should be mindful of. And when you read that school grooming policy, there are some typical things that are in there. It speaks particularly to child rights, the constitutional provisions, for example, freedom from discrimination on the basis of one's religion, and so on. It also speaks to an idea or rather the reality of our social context is that we're a melting pot out of many one people, and it gives a breakdown of the different racial and ethnic groups. And in light of that, the school grooming policy calls on the schools themselves to be mindful of some of these guiding principles, adhere to the principles and the letter of the law when it comes to not discriminating, and so on. So those are some of the broader things that are in the guideline. Now, the earlier guidelines did garner much criticism, as this current one here, notably Professor Carolyn Cooper. Last week, I saw an article from Muta Baruko chastising some aspects of the school grooming policy, saying that the boards are allowed basically to continue to do what they want to do.
Yes. Yes. And it is a matter that we cannot separate, Michael, as you would have alluded to, from our historical and cultural context. And historically, we have had a history of banning or deeming non-professional, culturally black hairstyles, including dreadlocks and cornrows and all other examples. We did see a case that challenged some of these aspects, that case of Virgo and the Kensington Primary School Board, where a child was denied entry to the institution due to having a locked hairstyle. And the reasoning from the institution was that locked hairstyles tend to not be properly cared for, and that the child may have what we call junjo, I don't have another word for it, that might create a lice infection in the school, which we are aware is a historical dog whistle for racist tendencies as it relates to hairstyling. So since then, we've seen some developments with the school grooming policy, but we've also seen several other complaints from other persons about being denied access to schooling due to their hairstyles.
All right, so do we have the senator online? No, not as yet. Do we have Dr. Abrams? 5 more minutes, all right. Miss Wright, thank you so much again for joining us in studio. And Kayla, she represents one of our partner organizations, Jamaica Youth Advocacy Network, JAN. So we're quite happy that you're here with us.
I'm happy to be here.
You can state your other past affiliation with GFJ, it's fine. Okay. All right. All right. So what is your feedback as a youngster? I think you're still in the youth bracket. Some of us follow a long time.
I'm still in the youth bracket.
You're still in the youth bracket. All right. So what is your immediate view on the school grooming policy?
Well, on the policy itself.
Yes.
Well, obviously, our problem with it is that it's not mandatory for the schools to implement all aspects of this policy. In the language of the policy is that they hope that the schools follow the guidelines set out in the policy, but that's not enough. It lacks teeth. We need to ensure that all public schools across the island are, I want to say, governed or subject to the same type of rules across the board, so that each rights of each student is being recognized equally across the board.
All right. Thank you so much, Kayla. We're just going to take the break, and then when we return, we pick up with the conversation.
Welcome back to Let's Talk Justice. We are talking about the school grooming policy, and we are currently joined by Miss Kayla Wright from JAN. We're hoping to be joined by some other guests shortly. So Kayla, right before the break, you were telling us that your challenge with the policy is that it is a policy. So it is basically an optional uptake for the schools. Yes. I wondered if you have any idea from JAN's perspective what the uptake of the original policy was like. Have you identified that there is an issue in taking up the guidelines that are in the policy?
There are, and I think a big reason is because there are no concrete sanctions for schools that breach the policy. So one of our positions is that where schools continuously breach the grooming policy, as though they are barring children from schools, endangering them, restricting them from going into classrooms, they should face sanctions, serious sanctions as well.
What type of sanctions are you thinking of?
Well, Jan's position is that, continuous breaches of the policy on the school's part should warrant serious sanctions, such as even the removal of the principal or shuffling around the board. Because if you are trying to enforce these rules on students, why can't you follow rules that are set out for you?
Okay. We're told that Senator Crawford is on the line now, but before we get to Senator Crawford, I want to put in context that one of the significant changes that the Minister of Education indicated based on her personal visits to school is that children of the Rastafarian faith, they will no longer be required to wear a tam. She made that absolute position. So let's put that in context based on our reading of the guidelines to see if her absolute and resolute position is actually reflective in the guidelines where schools are mandated not to do. I think we have to separate announcements from what is on paper.
Yes.
All right. Senator Crawford, thank you so much for joining our program.
Hi, thanks for having me. How are you doing?
We're doing well. I'm Mikkel Jackson, the Executive Director, and also co-hosting is Jade Williams, our Policy and Advocacy Specialist.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So, Senator Crawford, what is your immediate, what you would say now, feedback, response on the proposed policy as we have it here?
Well, I find the approach to be welcome. There is a need to ensure discipline, that persons learn how to conform. That is one of the duties of school. Mm-hmm. And there's also a need to move with the times to understand different in our current socialization, our current norms, and our current belief system. And so that is going to take a lot of engagement because there's multiple types of socialization. The principal would have been 1970s socialized. The teacher would have been 1990s socialized, and the child would have been 2023 socialized. And so the effort to engage, to consult, and to have individual recommendations, I think is a welcome and adequate approach.
And I'm happy you talk about socialized because one of the things in the policy does define fashion trend. My 15-year-old actually pointed that out to me, and he was of the view that what us old people deem as fashion trend and what they deem as fashion trend is something completely different. So I think that perspective...
Well, I can give you a simple example of that fact. When I was going to school, tight pants was a nerd. Big pants was what we all wanted, covered even our shoes. Yeah. Now, big pants is a nerd and tight pants is what they all want. Yes. And I believe that is why within this policy should be a form of a lobby arrangement that students can actually have their voices be heard as to what is acceptable in their times, in this time, and what should be enforced thereafter. Because none of us assume that there should be no rule. None of us assume that you should be wearing any uniform you want or any hairstyle that you want. So they should also have a say into where the line in the sand should be placed.
Senator, do you know if any such consultations would have taken place prior to the tabling of this iteration of the policy that we've seen?
I am not aware. I would not be able to say no, but I know that within the policy is not a lobby caveat to say students are able to make these changes through these principles and through these practices. I don't see that caveat.
And just to indicate that what the policy does outline is the past consultations that actually happened to develop the policy itself. And the policy provides for the schools themselves as they develop their own policies to consult parents, children, again, but these are guiding principles. They're not necessarily mandated in the process. So for those who are going to be reading that policy, just to put that in context. But Senator, before we go back to Kayla, because she made an instructive and statement earlier on sanctions. But before we get to that, there was the news report coming out of Saint, remind me of the country, Nevis.
Yes.
Saint Kitts, thank you. We actually tried to get the Minister of Education there, but we weren't successful. But based on our reading and gleaning of media reports, we get a sense that St. Kitts makes it absolutely clear that it's not just children who are practicing a religious faith. It's for any black child who wants to wear their afro, their locks. And from what I gleaned in the media report, it actually said as long as the afro is not blocking someone behind you, it's okay for you to wear it. So, did our policy go far enough in your estimation?
Well, the policy isn't yet set. This is a draft which will come under review, and there will be persons like yourself and others making inputs and conversation. So there is no set policy for me to actually say it hasn't gone far enough. The black image is being more accepted in the Western space than it was in the 1980s, the 1990s, and the early 2000s. And most of our rules are based on that norm acceptance. So because the norms are changing, because that lobby group is evolving and tension has evolved around the black image, because as you said, you don't have to be a Rastafarian to represent the Rastafarian image. I am not a practicing Rastafarian, but I acknowledge that this image is Jamaican, and some of the greatest contributors to Jamaica's cultural life and current perceptions have been made by persons with this type of image. So St. Kitts feels that the image in general should be embraced. However, St. Kitts didn't say cornrows, for example, on the male. And there might be some people who feel there should be that allowed cornrows. In fact, JC, I understand, allows for that type of hairstyle to come to school. So there is a limit, and it is going to take wide conversation to find where we are now for this limit and review consistently as they make the changes.
Thank you for that, Senator. So I hear you, and I don't know that we are having that level of consideration, and I wonder if that is the avenue for where our conversations need to go now, because I think when we talk about the policy, there is less of a emphasis on really understanding our cultural setting as it is now. I don't know if you disagree with that.
Is that to me?
Yes, that's to you.
Hello?
Yes, that was to you.
Well, again, I am not sure. I know my personal opinion, but I have no real audit of the society's general opinion. I have an understanding of the direction, a greater acceptance of the black image. How far has that gone of the African image? How far it has gone, I am indeed unaware. But out of many one people is what we say. If a person would accept the Indian image and have a nose ring, would the school accept that? Should the school accept that? If they would have the painted hands and they're not of the religion, should the schools accept that? So there is the need to find what really is the line for enforcement, because there cannot be no line at all. And if the general society opinion is as far as St. Kitts, then eventually the consultation should carry the audit there. And if the community's realities are considered, which I think the current policy allows for the school to be individualistic and to consider those community realities, because you can have a community with high prevalent Rastafarianism. You can have a community with highly prevalent Chinese influence or Indian influence. Some of the areas in Clarendon might have high Indian influence. And I come back to say the students should be able to lobby for those acceptance and those changes. For example, a head tie or a headgear, should that be allowed? So each of us will have our own opinion, but I think that the consultation process would carry out the average instinct of the general society.
Thank you so much, Senator. Before we get to you, Kayla, because there's a point I want to pick up on, but Dr. Michael Abrahams is on the call with us now. Doc, thank you so much for joining. I'm not sure if you heard some of what the senator indicated earlier, but based on what is happening with the school grooming policy, Dr. Abrams, are you hearing?
Yeah, man, I just joined. So who was speaking a while ago?
This is Mikkel, and Senator Damian Crawford was speaking earlier.
Nice, man. All right.
All right, great. Thanks again. Before we go to the break, just indicate to us what your immediate feedback and response to the school grooming policy is.
Well, I must admit, I haven't read all of it, but there are parts of it I find rather strange. For example, that children who are Rastafarian are allowed to wear locks. I don't really understand why that's confined to kids who are Rastafarian, because wearing locks is a hairstyle that many black people have. And it's kind of weird because I was in New York earlier this year and I saw black cops wearing dreadlocks in a predominantly white country. And even in our police force, I think they're not allowed to. So I really do not understand some of these hair policies. They baffle me.
All right. Before we go to the break, we have a minute. Kayla, as the youth advocate on the ground, what are some of the devastating effects of the sanctions that schools have placed on children? The locking out of school, what are the implications of those actions?
Well, and this is a popular practice by schools to bar students. It then becomes a child protection issue. You send your children to school to be in that school inside the walls for a period of time. Just barring them, disallowing them from entering the compound just because of grooming infractions is endangering them in a way. And that is a breach of their own rights as children by the virtue of them being children.
All right, thanks. We're going to take the break. All our guests, we're asking for you just to stay with us for another few minutes before we close out, but we take the break and return.
Welcome back to Let's Talk Justice. We've been discussing the school grooming policy and what its possible implications could be on our students. We are joined by Kayla Wright from JN, Dr. Michael Abrams, and Senator Damian Crawford. So before the break, Kayla, you were telling us about some of the effects of these policies and not adhering to the policies on students when they get locked out of school. I know one of the issues is that parents may not be given enough notice to respond to a child that the school is now saying is not in line with their grooming policy. Is that something that you guys have observed that JN is still an issue after that first policy in 2018?
It is still an issue, and again, the problem is that there are no uniformed sanctions for schools that breach the policy. So, as I said before, it becomes a child protection issue, and as you said, parents may not be notified, or students, they may not even drop their students to school. They may take public transportation. You have to take these things into consideration when thinking about what appropriate discipline looks like. We don't believe that endangering our students is an appropriate form of discipline.
And to take it a step further, and I'm happy Kayla said that, this is my disappointment with this aspect of the policy. It simply says the school should take appropriate actions, and something should only be done when you have made multiple attempts of dealing with the issue. I think there should be an absolute ban on schools locking out children. As Kayla rightfully said, this is a child protection matter. And I don't think discretion should be left up to the school on what appropriate discipline and disciplinary measures are. Just as though you can say you ought not to hit in public institutions, the same approach can be taken. We have to start asking the what if question. What if something happens to that child when a lockout has been done? What if this happens? What are you going to be telling that parent? So I think the policy, respectfully, and I'm happy that it has been done, but it needs to go a step further. Dr. Abrams, I know you're in office, so let me just ask you this just in case you have to go. I saw a tweet from a Member of Parliament, Orlando Terrelong. Nicely done tweet. Hair and dress perspective, he says, true freedom, true emancipation from mental slavery will come, but it will take all sections of society to continue to fight to continue the fight started by our ancestors centuries ago, and he continues to talk about the vestiges of colonialism being a contribution to the school grooming policy and how the schools have been implementing it in a way that is discriminatory. What is your feedback based on that tweet or your perspective? Dr. Abrams?
All right, can you hear me now?
Yes, hearing.
Yeah, I'm not sure if you're hearing me. I think it's sad that we're having this conversation in 2023. I really don't understand. To the best of my knowledge, is Mr.
Carolyn wears locks, but he's not a Rasta, right?
I'm not aware of his faith,
yes.
but to the best of my knowledge, what is on social media doesn't suggest it, but I can't speak with certainty.
And Damian, you're not a Rasta.
He said he isn't earlier, but he's on the call. He can answer you directly.
No, I'm not a practicing Rastafarian at all, Chief.
I didn't. This is what I don't understand. You have people like these gentlemen in positions of leadership in this country. You have people like, for example, Deon Jackson Miller, who is a respected journalist who wears locks. It's irrational. I still don't understand why kids can't wear locks unless they're Rastafarian. And the fact that Alanda used the word fight, I don't understand why it should be a fight. I really don't. So some of these things you're asking me, I really don't even understand why there are issues. I don't even know where to start. Mm-hmm. I think Jamaicans en masse should just protest this.
Yeah.
Because they're equating the length of your hair with discipline. And that makes no sense. Mr. Crawford and Mr. Terrelong are respected people in positions of authority. They go to Garden House. They're part of the whole lawmaking fraternity, or what you want to call it in this country. Mm-hmm. But you want to tell a child, oh, you can't wear locks unless they're Rasta. It just makes no sense. It's totally illogical. It's absolutely illogical. And I think a lot of this is because we're still not emancipated. When we had Emancipation Day and Independence Day this year, I didn't even wish anybody happy Independence or Emancipation Day because we're not emancipated, you know. Mm. We're not. And I don't think this conversation should end here. I think we really need to challenge those in positions of authority to be rational and realistic and to be aware that they're still mentally enslaved. There's no rational reason for this.
And
I don't even know how to start the conversation, you know, because there's no reason. There's no good reason. I think it's just left to people's whims and fancies. So you don't like locks, so guess what? I'm going to say that, like I'm a teacher or principal, I don't like locks, so guess what? Don't wear it because I don't like it. But there's no rational reason for that.
All right, thank you so much. Senator Crawford, Dr. Abrams said something, the whims and fancy. And Kayla spoke earlier about some of the real implications of children being locked out and so on. And based on my reading of the policy, and I stand to be corrected, I don't think the policy adequately addresses some of those things where there is a complete prohibition that a school can't do. What do you think sanctions should be generally from the Ministry of Education if a child is locked out or if a school breaches the guiding principles of this policy?
Well, I am being convinced by some of the arguments being put forward by Kayla, but it's a very difficult thing to respond to because if there is to be punishment enforced, that punishment must have categories, degrees of difficulty. Should a lockout be the first? Maybe no. But eventually, if the lower levels of discipline isn't sufficient, there must become a higher level of discipline. There might be a need to maybe indicate not to come to school tomorrow by sending home a letter to the parent. Because what she has highlighted is if the parent had made no facilitation, having expected the child to be supervised by adults in the school space from X time to X time, and the school takes a decision without giving the parents ample time to make counter arrangement, then that really endangers the child, and that argument finds favor with me. So maybe the on the day decision should be extended to you can't come back tomorrow until this is rectified, whatever it is that need to be rectified. And then the parent would be able to make those arrangements, having been informed with ample time. And maybe tomorrow is not the ample time, maybe it's next week. But the point I'm trying to make is that I find some agreement with the risk associated with immediately sending home a child that might not have provisions for supervision from an adult. But I still feel that at some point, separation must be the ultimate punishment.
All right. Thank you so much, Senator. Just going to take some last words. Kayla, I'm going to ask, since you're in studio with us, to continue so we can have some further discussions, yeah?
Okay.
But last word from you, Dr. Abrahams, and then last word from you, Senator. Going forward, what must be done?
I think we need to have more conversations like this, and the populace need to speak up. This is 2023. It's 2023. It should no longer be an issue.
Yes.
And I find that there's a lot of discrimination against Afrocentric hairstyles. And it's not just in schools. And our nurse in a hospital was told that she couldn't wear shiny bumps to work because it's unprofessional.
Yes.
But her co-workers who straighten their hair to look like Cinderella or Snow White or Sleeping Beauty, that's okay. So no, it's not acceptable, no.
All right, thank
we need
you.
to keep talking about, we need to speak out.
Thank you so much, Doc, and my apologies to your patient.
No, I'm okay now, and I'm good. No, it's a quiet time now. It's good. I'm good.
All right. Last word, Senator.
Yeah, you have to apologize to my goats as well, you know, because
Of course, our apologies equally shared.
But no, a lot of people believe a campaign is only for a political process, meaning the political parties. It seems to me that there is a ingrained opinion within the society that Afrocentric images are less professional, less acceptable, and more indicators of indiscipline. And there needs to be a general campaign by those who disagree to ensure. I wear my locks because my father in 1981 had to trim his so that him actually get a job. I am now sitting in the parliament with my locks, and it shows how time has changed.
Yes.
So I'm wearing mine in representation of the sacrifice that he had to make just to be paid minimum wage at the time. So there has been changes, but if we feel it's not fast enough, it takes a campaign. And that campaign is for persons like yourself and Kayla, who clearly is extremely smart with some of the opinions I've heard her proclaim, to campaign to the wider society to reconsider and to be informed about why changes are necessary.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. That was Dr. Michael Abrahams and Senator Damian Crawford. We continue with Kayla, so I won't say anything where she's concerned, but we appreciate you gentlemen for joining. You know, one of the things I remember when Terry Carroll won Miss Jamaica, I had the opportunity to interview her when I was working with Buzz Caribbean Lifestyle magazine.
Wow, Nickel in another life.
Yes, I was almost a NIDA practitioner. And one of the things that struck me was just how she owned the Afro style that she was sporting at the time. She was always the big Afro on stage. And it struck me because I found it absolutely empowering seeing her, you know, and, you know, listening to Senator just now to the reason for him wearing his locks is something, a little sort of rebellion. Look what you did to my father, but here I am. You know, so I think we need to start having more of these conversations. And we have a comment here online, Jade,
Yes,
if you could.
We do.
Read it. I will have to zoom up. You know, the eye is not so good.
Yes, so this is from our YouTube page. So keep in mind we're streaming live on YouTube right now. So if you want to make a comment of your own, feel free to do so. But this person says that they agree that schools locking out students should not be a step that is taken. Society has changed significantly, and schools must play a role in ensuring a child's safety. Policies with respect to hair and schools are based on outdated views. For example, life survive in other hair, and persons wearing synthetic hair extensions are less likely to have a lice problem. But as I can recall from my own school experience, synthetic hair is a no-no if you are to adhere to an internal school policy.
But the St. Kitts one, it does say, for example, you can wear wigs if there's a medical condition. I really need to put my hand on that actual policy because I don't like reading media reports and speaking on it as a statement of fact. I emailed them to get a copy actually because I think it will make for instructive reading as we do our advocacy. Apparently the comments are coming and say Vanessa WhatsApping us down like crazy. But we're up on a break. So let's take the break and then we have some more discussions with Kayla.
Welcome back to Let's Start Justice. We've been having a robust conversation on and off the air.
Some of which cannot be said on air, so we will keep it off, Miss Williams.
Yes, in relation to our school grooming policies. And we are still joined by Miss Kayla Wright from JAN. Kayla, I wanted to ask you what's the gauge from the youth? I know that you and your team would have done some level of consultation with the young persons that are a part of your network. What is their experience with these policies?
Well, the general consensus is that the school grooming policies are ridiculous. But before I get into what they said, I just want to pinpoint what the policy says, that it is referring to cultural identity or climate situation, socioeconomic considerations, and the aims of the institution. So then, zoning on the climate situation, as they said in the policy, why is it then that some schools have the requirement that the uniform skirts are supposed to be 2 inches below the ankle?
Oh, no. It has gone a step further. Some are basically ankle length. I kid you not.
Wow.
But
as old as I am, some students reach out.
I know, I've seen that. So
yeah.
The consensus, even stemming from that then, is that the grooming policies are ridiculous. And last night on our Twitter, Youth Advocate JA, we asked students to share their experiences with unjust grooming policies, and a lot of it was height of hair or the tightness of the pants or whether they had an afro out and the disparity between their afros that grow naturally out of their head that way and persons of other races who may have hair that grows downwards. So overall, it's ridiculous and it's oppressive. And the more we uphold these rules is the more we oppress our students. Because our heritage isn't disruption. We are a Black majority society. Let our rules and schooling reflect that.
Can JFJ steal that line or borrow it? Or please write it down. It was a beautiful line.
Yes.
Our heritage. Repeat it for us, Kayla.
Our heritage is not disruption. That came from one of our youth advocates.
Oh, so we can't thief it then.
No plagiarism.
I stole it. So maybe you can't.
but we will know that it came from Jan. Beautifully said. To move beyond the conversation of school grooming though, and I hope I'm not putting you on the spot, but if it's not even in your position at JAN as a youth, we are now upon discussions on constitutional reform. And just last night, I had my first class politics. And unsurprisingly so, and I'm not bashing my students because they're really good people. Once I cursed them out in the first class about the need to watch news and so on, they're excellent. And what struck me, and I don't know why I keep being surprised, we don't have that understanding of just the basic structure of government, why we need to get rid of the monarchy. I think only 5 of them out of 30-something knew that there was a Ministry of Legal and Constitutional Affairs and that there's a Constitutional Reform Committee that was established. How can we get the youth more excited about the political process and the importance of it and the need for their participation?
I think standing up for the youth, it's because a lot of what they see is oppressive to them, so they don't even want to be engaged in processes like this because they don't see how it will benefit them at all. So I think overall, maybe public education, you're doing a great thing having classes, just generally getting them to know about the procedures that have to be undergone for legislation to be passed, for policy to be passed, the differences between policy and legislation, who does what, just so that they have a better understanding. And then when these policies come to pass, when the legislation comes to pass, they can understand and form their own positions on it and be integral in the decision-making processes of Jamaica.
Yeah. Right. I think we need to really be thinking about where these young people are and, as you said, what that public education entails, because even something as simple as the right to education and listening to them, school fee too high and so on. And I'm like, this is why you need to participate. Maybe we should be asking for right to education up to tertiary level. So, Kayla, thanks again for being here. We appreciate it. Anything else from your perspective or any discussions you would want to have with Kayla Jade?
No, I not necessarily with Kayla. I just wanted to make an additional point as we close off this conversation around grooming and participation, is that a lot of gender non-conforming people are also really affected by grooming policies because they tend to also kind of encourage gender norms. So I think we should, even looking at it from that perspective, try to force our participation so that we can ensure that we're properly represented in these processes and policies.
As you said that, my mind just went to even the conversation that we had a few weeks ago. We talk about persons who have different gender identities and not necessarily conforming to the norms of society in that regard. And the fact that even from a public health perspective, you have decisions being taken on the basis of being male or female in that very restrictive manner.
Yes.
We have different people here in society. We're a diverse society. And, we have to one day have these conversations, as you're saying, Jade. But, boy, if they're not even there with Afro here.
It's surprising because I remember earlier times in this show, earlier episode, we were getting some live comments and someone said, oh no, we're at Parliament. And someone said, I like to see black people wear their hair like this, referring to me having an afro in
and
Parliament.
And your hair was very well, sorted that day. Yeah.
Thank you. But I think that it was surprising to me to realize that that's still something that is lauded, that it would be surprising to people. That would be something for people to point out. So I think as far as we are, we still have our ways. It's so many things, and some of it's perhaps not necessarily a JFJ issue, but it's a wider societal issue. Even as females, you look pretty for a black girl. Those conversations are still being had. You're blessed with a child, and the conversation becomes, the child is light-skinned now. Yes, it's a newborn. Me hope the color stay. And these are the real conversations that we have as a society. So you guys are absolutely correct. How do we come to terms with our Afrocentric looks versus the Eurocentric ones and our acceptance of beauty? I think it is a fundamental issue we need to, and it is sad that in a predominantly black society, these are
dangerous. It is dangerous with our identity in general and how we view ourselves and how we go out into the world.
Kayla, somebody was walking on Grand Spain Road where we're located, and I stopped and I pulled down my window. And I say, hat. It's a young man with a broad-rimmed hat. His face fully covered, so you only can see the eyes. He has a little hole to breathe through. And it's black, Yeah. He's bleaching.
Yeah, fully covered.
And we've had complaints at JFJ about another thing here with the bleaching in the schools. And we've had parents saying, the same lockout conversation because of the bleaching. And I understand it from a medical perspective that schools, we have to be careful as adults and look out for the best interest of the child. I remember one of our attorneys at the office said, why is the child bleaching though? And it's a real question that we have to be asking, why a 14 or 15-year-old is embarking on these situations.
Absolutely.
But we judge without coming to terms with the underlying issue, the real issue at play. Why are we doing these things just the same as a society? And it comes to we're ashamed of our blackness. And I think it's something we really have to sort out.
Yep. And I think now is the time. We're reviewing our constitution. We're trying to develop our national identity. Now is the time to be having these conversations.
God bless the king. It's such an affront to have those. But let me not go on my ranting. But
Yes.
when you're reading those pieces of legislation, I urge you to pick up one, and you see that sort of honoring of the king.
Yeah.
And what we have to actually put on paper. And when we're swearing in our parliamentarians, and by the way, Barbados, who is actually a republic, and again, the constitution is made up differently, so they didn't need a whole referendum. They just said we're calling our attorneys senior counsels.
Yes.
So we're not going to be saying Casey and then having Calabar and so on all up in arms about that sort of language we have. But last word, Kayla. I know Jade wants to close out. She has her trivia. Somebody apparently won. Kudos.
Oh, that's nice. Well, just that earlier saying that, we can't even talk about certain things because even school grooming is an issue. But I think we can be aspirational in our asks, and wherever it lands and sticks, then that's good too.
Absolutely. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you so much.
Kayla Wright, project officer with responsibility for
Advocacy and programs.
Okay, great. Title long though, Kayla. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, so we're in our last minute, so we'll give you our trivia winner for this week, which was Edith Rose. So you will get your prize via DM. The question was, who was the Minister of Education when the school grooming policy was implemented, and what was the full name of the ministry at the time? The answer was Senator Roel Reid, and the ministry was of Education, Youth and Information.
Yes, Senator Roel Reid was also the Minister of Information at the time, not Nestor.
Yes. All right. So that was Let's Talk Justice. We will be back next week at the same time with the show, so please join us. I am Jade Williams, Policy and Advocacy Specialist at JFJ.
And I'm Michael Jackson, Executive Director. Thank you so much as usual for tuning in. Have a good day.